Hi, my name is Merce and welcome to another video. Today we will discuss how we choose for a good edition for the score that you want to practice. You know, as a guitar teacher, I consistently have the experience of meeting, especially at the first lesson, students who present a score downloaded from some more or less legal pages on the web. Most of the time, they are scores that they have been completely distorted by the reviewer who changes notes, removes and adds slurs, distorting the phrasing and the articulation, and so on and so forth. In short, they are scores that are unusable if you want to study any music seriously and with any rigorous historical basis. So in this video, I would like to propose some strategies and criteria that are the basis for choosing a good and long-lasting edition. The main priority is certainly to get as close as possible from the primary source of the score. The composer's manuscript itself is therefore the first thing to go to look for. Sometimes, however, especially in early music, but also in modern composers, we will discuss this later, due to the ravages of time and history, we are dealing with several manuscripts of the same piece, none of which can be attributed to the composer himself. In this case, we will have to choose the one that seems the most reliable to us. For example, the cello suites by Bach. They are a good example of this kind. For obvious reason, that of his wife, Anna Maria Magdalena, should be the most reliable. Although this manuscript also presents some problems in the legibility of the articulation slurs. In fact, she did not play both instruments, so we can reasonably assume that she copied an existing manuscript of her husband, Johann Sebastian Bach. A manuscript, apart from the incredible charm that it emanates, sometimes it contains information related to the layout that is practically impossible to reproduce, even with the best of the modern editions. For example, we can take a look to these wavy slurs of the chaconne, as opposed to the following ones, which are very marked and straight. I know, it's kind of an oxymoron to define a bow as straight, but you understand what I mean. It's like really well defined. This difference in the composer's layout gives us a very valuable information regarding the performance of this passage. The figures with this wavy art must be executed with more freedom, while the other ones with more rhythmic rigor. As mentioned, none of the modern editions show these arcs in the original form. Immediately below the composer's manuscript would be then the first edition, or facsimile, of the chosen piece. The first edition has the following advantages. It is an edition that was printed when the composer was still alive, with the obvious exception of the posthumous works. The printed draft was therefore certainly followed by the composer, who took care of all the signs that he considered fundamental for the understanding of the piece. On first editions, or facsimiles, there are no fingerings apart from the exceptional ones that were indicated by the author himself. For instance, the use of a high position instead of a much lower position, or a performance of certain notes in two strings in a particular passage, as opposed to on the same string. This allows us to develop and exercise the art of fingering, according to the performance practice of the period to which the piece belongs. We can choose what we consider the best, and not stick to something already pre-written like we do most of the time. However, a problem that concerns manuscripts and less frequently the first editions or facsimiles is the usability or readability for study purposes. For instance, let's take a look at the beginning of the second violin sonata by Bach. It is quite intuitively understood that editing this scores with the addition of fingerings, slurs, both for phrasing and articulation, or just personal notes, would be a pretty heroic undertaking, and that the final result will not really be suitable for using this score as a study material. In some first editions of the 19th century, we can meet the same problem. Let's take, for instance, these two lines of the first movement of the Sonata Opus 53 by Francesco Molino. Probably, in order to save space, the layout was sometimes really very tight and really compressed. Obviously, there was no problem of writing the fingerings, considering the fact that the fingering system in the 19th century was, so to speak, automatic. So everything was done at the possiblest lowest position of the instrument, with the exceptions that those were always indicated. The same was true for the articulation. For us guitar players and modern teachers, however, the problem arises, and therefore we often find ourselves faced with the first editions where there is no physical space to write in a legible manner all the signs necessary for an accurate study of the score. For all these reasons, my study and teaching method is based on the manuscript or first edition as a primary source of the musical material. All of this supported by a modern edition that is easy to read and close to sources that we mentioned before. Like this, I can write the fingerings, articulation, and everything stays in a readable way. So, the perfect candidate for this modern edition is the Urtext. This is nothing more than a modern printed edition that sticks rigorously, at least in its intentions, to the manuscript or the first edition of a given piece. These are really precious and very well edited scores, but they have an inevitable disadvantage. Basically, that they are written by a human. Let me explain this. As much as the editor in the Urtext might be scientifically objective, he or she will necessarily have to make many decisions in the drafting of such edition that are of course based in his personal perceptions of some elements of the manuscript or the first edition. Among these, we can certainly find the interpretation of the articulation arches. Where do they begin? Where do they finish? And also the correction of the notes that either by oversight or by conscious choice of the composer, the editor perceives as incorrect. Obviously, many times in the manuscripts, these are clear errors in the composer's writing. The same thing applies to many first editions of the 19th century pieces. Sometimes, however, one encounters rather serious errors that greatly undermine the musical substance of the piece in question. So let's take two striking examples from the Sonata 1001 of Bach. The E natural is corrected in all editions, even in the most serious and reliable Urtext ones, to an E flat. However, we see that the E flat is missing in the key accidentals and that the following note is an E flat with a flat next to it. Just as the same offending note, as a few notes later, it's also indicated with a nice flat. This sonata is in Dorian mode. No scandal that this E is natural, apart from the fact that our centuries-old habits have accustomed us to expect an E flat at this moment. The same mistake occurs in the exposition of the fugue. An E natural is replaced with an E flat. Although it must be said that some editions in here at least give the benefit of the doubt and place a flat above the E in a small typo. Here too, as before, the E is perceived and then immediately followed by an E flat. You know, I think it is practically impossible that a composer that is so surgically precise in his writing, like Bach, could have committed this clamorous slip of a pen. Let's not forget that accidentals were placed on every note in that time. To remain in this piece for the sake of the example, the articulation of this figure has also been interpreted in the following manner in the Urtext. Then, however, it is clearly different. The bowing begins from the following note. Especially in Bach's music, many modern editors are disconcerted by the variety of articulations, even for the same figuration, that the composer uses, and therefore they tend to make homogeneous and make the same everything, with a very serious damage to the obvious imagination and huge creativity that Bach had. A problem very much related to the performance of ancient music that you might encounter in many printed scores is also that of the writing of embellishments in full, not only indicated with a symbol but written in real notes, whose realization is therefore left only to the reviser without the possibility for the reader to make his own choice of which embellishment you use and how to perform it. These editions can dramatically impoverish the scores, especially the ones of the lute repertoire, for instance, Weiss tombeau, in which the embellishment symbols are almost always realized as appoggiaturas. It's the same problem that happens in the 995 of Bach. Here's the beginning of this fantastic tombeau on the death of Logi by Weiss. It can be seen that Weiss places a semicircle to the right side of the note to be embellished, which indicates the position of the note with which the embellishment will be performed, in this case, higher. In many editions, we do not find this embellishment sign, but rather an execution of the same written real notes. As we see, the embellishment is reduced to a simple appoggiatura on the downbeat. Yet here the instinct and the comparison with similar passages by other composers would actually lead us more to a performance of a more than before the downbeat. So here is a good reason to use the tablature and write your own transcription. Also remember that for pieces in tablature, there is also the problem that the duration of the sounds and the voicing that we could perceive in a totally different way from that of the reviser of a certain edition. Another big problem in choosing the right edition arises when you want to study a transcription. With the exception of some very good editions, we find here the lack, sometimes total, of articulation signs, especially in early music, and also of dynamics and phrasing. I'm thinking specifically of a repertoire closer to us, like Albeni's, for example. In this case, the best choice would be to take the original score, chosen with the same criteria described above, of the piece and make your own transcription or arrangement. Of course, this could be a rather complicated task for some students of the first years, so the success of all this project really relies on having the teacher to accompany you through such a journey with all the important decisions. Actually, the closer we get to the present day, the more paradoxically complicated things become. You know, the guitar repertoire coexists with a unique paradox in the history of music, of basically being made up of original repertoire that, in fact, it's not. Let me explain. The entire repertoire of Segovia and his successors, like Bream, Williams, Diaz, was in fact composed by composers who were not guitar players. Inevitably, the works needed to be arranged for our instrument, especially in the works of composers with a particularly difficult and non-idiomatic type of writing. Then the comparison of the manuscripts really allow us to see how the works sometimes dramatically distances from the original form, like it happens with Tedesco Boccanini, with Rodrigo's Invocazione Danza, or with Tanzmann Hommage à Chopin, or with Ponce Tema Varie Finale. The dilemma, of course, assails us when we have to decide which of these editions we have to buy. Then the question that we have to ask ourselves are, for instance in Tedesco, is it better to buy Segovia's version or Gilardino's with a manuscript? Can I use it in a competition without running the risk of being eliminated by a Segovian just because it's a version that is not the one that we have been used for the last decades, even if the manuscript might be much more interesting? The same goes for the Tema Varie Finale of Ponce. The manuscript actually has some more variations. The order of the variations is also different, and the second part of the theme does not have a refrain, which is a big thing. And basically the whole cycle in its original form takes on a completely different shape in the structure, and it's incredibly much more balanced than the Scott version. And of course the Invocazione Danza then is a clinical case. Basically the manuscript shows a piano piece just written on one pentagram. Absolutely unplayable for guitar. And there are at least 3 available editions to purchase, so the one of Tarragó, the one of Diaz, and the one of Pepe Romero. All of them quite far from the original version. So which one to buy? In these extreme cases, I think you have to set priorities. If one believes that the works have suffered a revision that is sometimes inattentive to the musical elements and values, one can opt for versions that report the manuscript at the end or that are based on the manuscript itself. Like for instance it happens with the Hopstock edition of the Ponce works. With this basis, alone or with the help of the teacher, you can create your own edition. I think it will be a job for your life that you will keep forever. And as a musician, it will give you a lot of growth and will be much more than not just to pass a round of a certain competition. Also because in a competition, the juries are often unknown until the moment that you go to perform, so you cannot anticipate who is gonna be there if it's gonna prefer one thing over the other. So in that case, I will opt for what will make me grow as a musician, and if I have bad luck in a competition in this regard, so be it. And besides this, one day maybe you will have a student yourself and you will have to teach this piece. And I believe that we have the moral duty before a professional one to basically know the manuscript version so that you can give valuable information to your students to help form their own vision of the piece. I hope you find interesting my thoughts. Of course, it's just my opinion. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. I will be reading you. I think this is a topic that can give a long conversation, so I would love to read you. And if you enjoyed it, please drop a like, subscribe for more content like this, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.